honestly feel like a spoiled child after having to write a full length poem after 2 weeks of writing limericks. But why exactly? Well, that's what we'll be saying in this week of the Poetry Challenge. Hi everyone, I'm Sanchit Batra and welcome back to the Poetry Challenge, where I write a poem every week and then record a video about it in which I do an in-depth analysis and also tell as to what I as the poet mean in between the lines so that you can become a better literary critic or even a poet yourself. Now this week's poem is special in this challenge because I am having to write this full-length poem, and why am I putting these double quotes I'll tell you later. But I'm having to write this full-length poem after 2 weeks of writing limericks, which are like 5 line poems, right? I told you. Now you might be thinking that Sanchit, earlier also you used to write poems with a gap of like, let's say 1 month in between or 2 months in between. Why didn't you lose practice then but are losing practice now? Well, that is because then I did not used to write in those 1 months poems at least. But this time I was writing. It was just that I was in the comfort zone of writing simpler poems, writing poems in which I did not have to stretch too much on the rhyme because it was a simple A rhyme scheme. And also, I did not have to stress a lot upon introducing deeper thoughts. While in those earlier 1 month breaks, I used to have deeper thoughts. It's just that I did not compile them into poems, or I did not write them down as poems, right? So that's the difference between those two scenarios. But why was I putting those double quotes? Because when I say full length poem as compared to a limerick, that sounds unfair. Because you see, limericks are as much poems, as much full length poems as any others. But it's just that I feel like they are short ones and so they are more fun to write. But my usual style, that is a more longer one. And so for me specifically, those are shorter poems as compared to my usual ones, and that is why I used to double quotes. Do not assume that writing limericks is not exactly similar to writing poems. It is, and it certainly works. Okay, so it's just that my way of writing isn't too similar to limericks, and so that was just a break due to the examinations. Anyways, I don't think I should blabber further. I should probably move on to the poem, and in the second reading we can do the analysis. So here is the poem. The sun sets below the sky. The mountains tower tall and high. The orange emerges from the blue mixed with yellow, a delightful hue. The silhouettes of skyscrapers rise brilliantly above the canopic layers. Ultimately, it gets dark. The air is ringing with the music of the lark. And so ends the natural symphony, one of evil and of beauty. And that was the poem for this week. Now, before I move on to the analysis, I must say that for this particular poem, I had one aim in my mind. And it's quite ironic that I am calling what I'm about to tell you an aim, because it was to have no aim altogether. What that is, let me explain. You see, whenever I write poems as a fervent student of science and logic, I try to introduce logic into them. Like that rationalism creeps into my poems. And that is what I did not want to make happen this time. I did not want to bring myself out as someone interested in science in this poem. When someone should read this poem, they should not know that I am interested in science. They should only think that I am a very artistic person, and that whatever I am writing only is coming out of my heart, and that I'm putting absolutely no thought into it. And that is why I did not put any thought into it. I just let the thoughts flow. I knew I had a basic idea because I was writing this during the evening. The basic idea was, it's like if you've seen one of those paintings, it's like red to orange to yellow to white, a hue in the sky, and then there's a black colored silhouette of an urban city as the foreground. And it shows a sunset or a sunrise, however the viewer interprets it. I wanted to write a similar sort of a poem. Except now that I think of it, I could have incorporated the aspect in which a person reading the poem could have thought of it as a sunset or a sunrise. Anyways, as I said earlier, I did not put much thought into this poem. I just wanted to let the thoughts flow and be penned down as they were, candid. I just put the bare minimum that it required to make it rhyme, because as I've mentioned earlier in this challenge as well, rhyme is one of my utmost priorities during writing poems, because it just gives a rhythm to the poem, it just gives a flow to the poem and allows the reader to swim in the poem, if you understand my analogy, right? So I just thought of that painting and I knew I had to paint that image in the reader's minds just using words. So how did I do that? Well, let's do the analysis. The sun sets below the sky, the mountains tower tall and high. So, as any other artist, we first paint the background because we can do the silhouette later as well. And that is why the first line says the sun sets below the sky, and so we have already painted the sky, we've already painted the sun. I did not describe them because once again it has to be simple, and that is not something that struck in my mind, and I did not put much thought into it as well. Anyways, so we are talking about the sun setting below the sky, and then we are just putting a rough outline, let's say, because you see I'll be actively comparing this to an actual painting and the process of a painter, right? So we are just making an outline of the foreground. We are just talking about the mountains tower tall and high. So there are mountains, but how is this an urban background? Because mountains aren't there in an urban background, right? So that is what comes later in the poem. But for this one, just see that the sun is setting below the sky with those reddish, orangish, yellowish hues, and then the mountains are towering tall and high in front of them, because usually it's a beautiful scene to behold when the sun is setting and some sort of a building or a structure or a natural feature is blocking the sun and is like acting as a sort of a shadow on the sun itself, and it's a beautiful scene and I wanted to describe that in my poem. Moving on to the next line, the orange emerges from the blue. Now, what do I mean when I say the orange emerges from the blue? So, you see, this whole line, the orange emerges from the blue mixed with yellow, a delightful hue. I tried out a couple of combinations here. I tried out with the red and the orange come together, and it was a numerous number of combinations. But then I thought, since I'm not able to make the lines that much so easy to read, like the reader cannot the reader will have to find the rhythm, will have to find the music in these lines. I did not want that. I just wanted the music to flow as it was in the reader's mind automatically. So what I did was I tried to rewind. So rather than jumping directly on the evening in the second line, I went a bit back to like a couple of minutes before sunset when the sky is still blue, and then I said the orange emerges from the blue. So introducing orange as a new, let's say, entity, as a new characteristic, as a new color, we just said it emerges from the blue. So we are plucking it from the blue itself, and then we are saying since the orange is emerging from the blue mixed with yellow, and yellow, I am honestly just realizing as I read this poem, yellow can also be used to symbolize the sun along with the other colors in the sky itself. So the orange emerges from the blue mixed with yellow, which is the sun or the area around the sun, such as the sun rays and the glow of it, a delightful hue. Because as soon as the word blue comes in my mind, the other thing is hue. And I know if I'm writing blue in a sentence where it does not mean like the blues, the sadness, that kind of thing, I know I can use the word hue to a very good extent, because blue in itself is a color and is a hue, right? So that's what went into this line. Moving on to the third line, the silhouettes of skyscrapers rise brilliantly above the canopy clears. And now we are like starting to add, let's say, a bit more details into the painting. And how are we doing that? We say the silhouettes of skyscrapers, which means now we are introducing the urban background. But a city cannot just have skyscrapers as well, right? That would be quite weird in my personal opinion. Being a person living in a city like Dehradun, which is among the hills, I find the city full of skyscrapers quite overwhelming, honestly. So in the next line, rise brilliantly above the canopy clears. And I believe this line is a very good example of understanding how a writer or a poet can like use all his vocabulary from even the farthest fields and put them in his poem, even if they feel remotely related. So you see, here's how. Geography is a very technical subject, and honestly speaking, I do not like geography at all. But then again, I once studied about this concept that in a forest there are layers, and two of these layers were the emergent layer, which is the topmost layer, which is like a few trees that just happen to be so tall that they are seen distinctly from the rest of the forest. And then the canopy is like the umbrella which covers the entire forest, because the emergent layer cannot cover the entire forest. It's just a few spikes. The canopy, however, is like an umbrella. It's a broad, thick trees like the banyan one, which cover the entire forest and hide the undergrowth from anything flying above. Right. So I try to incorporate that concept into the urban background. So here the skyscrapers are the emergent layer, and the smaller residential buildings, the normal ones that you and I live in, these were incorporated as the canopy, which in a sense could also be said to be hiding the humanity living underneath, right? So those are like the meanings you can bring out from a poem as you read through it, and your meaning might just as well be different from what the poet thought. And honestly speaking, poets feel very happy when people try to find new and different meanings out of their poems, because they see it from new perspectives that they could never have, because they have never lived life and experienced it from the perspective of the reader, right? So we love it when people interpret our poems. So moving on to the next line, ultimately it gets dark, the air is ringing with the music of the lark. Now you see, since I did not have to put much strain on my mind for this poem, as soon as the immediate next thought in my mind wasn't about evening, I knew I did not have to write about evening. So I moved on to night. And so when I thought about night, the first word that came to my mind was dark. And then here's the interesting part. When I thought of the word dark and I wrote the line, ultimately it gets dark, the next word in my mind was lark. And lark is like a bird which sings and all. And so I knew, since lark sing at the night, I guess I have to like incorporate that into my poem as well. So ultimately it gets dark, the air is ringing with the music of the lark. And so we are making a peaceful environment now. We are turning the painting into an animation. You see what all we have done in this single 5-line poem, where each line incorporates two more lines which are rhyming with each other. So this is longer than a limerick. You do mind that. Okay, so we are making the environment more peaceful, with the sound of the lark being the only distant sound that the reader can hear as he reads. So this is a bit of auditory imagery being incorporated into this poem. And so in the last I say, and so ends the natural symphony, one of farewell and of beauty. And there I put an end to the poem, I put a full stop, and that's it. Because here I'm saying, and so ends the natural symphony, which means all of these activities that were happening at the same time, this is a symphony of nature. This is a way of nature to communicate to us how beautiful it is. And it is one of farewell and of beauty. And farewell here has two meanings, you see. Farewell, one could be interpreted as being people going back to their homes, because it's evening, so everyone's saying goodbye. It's basically goodbye time. And that's why I'm talking about this is a time which is one of farewell. But also, since we are talking about the natural symphony here also refers to the poem. And so one of farewell means the poem is ending. It's a signal to the reader, prepare yourself, relax yourself, because the poem is about to end. And one of beauty, emphasizing on the beauty of nature and the lines which describe it. And that is how I have written my poem for this week. If you liked it, do tell me in the comments below, like this video, and if you want to be notified every time a new video is uploaded on this channel, every time a new video is uploaded to this challenge, do subscribe and click the bell icon down below. If you want to participate with me, if you want to write your own poems, even if you don't want to be regular about it, even if you don't want to be tired in a challenge, just write what comes to your mind, like I did this week for the first time in this challenge, and just tag me so that I get to know that you have written something. And if the poem seems appropriate enough to be presented in a video, I certainly will do that. I will try to incorporate as many poems as I can. Anyways, that was the poem for this week. This is me, Sanchit Batra, signing out for now. See you next week.